Have you ever seen a movie so amazing, so beautiful, that whenever you discuss it, no one takes you seriously? Well, that happens to me whenever I mention these two words, Brokeback Mountain. Instead, I receive laughs and jokes about the story. I know many know this film from memes or pop culture references, but do you know the actual story? The love story begins in 1963 at Signal, Wyoming, where we meet our two main characters, Ennis Delmar and Jack Twist. They are hired for a summer job where they must herd sheep through Brokeback Mountain. They spend several days throughout their journey through the mountains, just being amongst each other, slowly bonding together until one day where they're drinking and sitting around the fire. Ennis discusses with Jack about his family, having a fiance, and how he ended up with a summer job. Jack comments on how this is the most Ennis has talked to him since they started the job. That night, Jack tries to convince Ennis to sleep in the tent with him since it's really cold instead of him being outside. Once the fire dies out, Ennis is seen to be shivering really badly, and Jack wakes up and notices that he can't take the outside cold. So instead, he tells Ennis to come join him. And without any argument, Ennis does run to the tent to join Jack. Although as they sleep in the middle of the night, Jack grabs Ennis's arms to wrap around him. This causes him to wake up in confusion and panic while Jack calms him down. Where they have this sexual tension moment amongst each other and leads them to having sexual intercourse. This is the first turning point of the relationship. The next morning, there is a noticeable change between the two. Ennis doesn't talk to Jack, while Jack does tell him a few words, but he just writes off. Later on, Ennis makes it clear to him that it was a one-time thing, it did not mean anything at all to him, and that he's not gay. Jack just agrees in a way where you just have to accept the reality of the situation that you're in with the person, and you know that you have to lie to yourself. But that same night, they share the tent again and have that romantic moment where they just, again, sleep together. Several days go by, and their boss is at the top of one of the hills in Brokeback Mountain, and he catches a moment where Jack and Ennis are being really friendly together, and he takes note of this interaction between the two. On one of the last days of the job, Jack comes up to Ennis with the lasso, being playful and joking around with him. But soon their playfulness turns into this rough wrestle where Ennis ends up being hit in the face and bloodied in the aftermath, and Jack just gets hit in the head. Once they return back to town, Ennis makes a comment to Jack about how he lost a shirt up in the mountains. Jack makes a small remark and kind of dismisses the whole issue. Then Jack questions Ennis if he's gonna be returning next year, but he replies that he doesn't think so since he's gonna be married soon and he wants to live his life with his fiancée. They part their ways, but Ennis stops himself in his tracks and has this really emotional moment to himself where he's crying and gagging in a sort of panic attack kind of way. We time jump to Ernest's wedding, and he's happily married now with his wife, having fun, living their life together, and soon she's pregnant with their first child. Then again, there's another time jump where it's a year later, and Jack is back at the same place, talking to the same farmer, asking if there's a job and that if Ennis has returned. Although the farmer is a bit rude and says that there is no job for Jack, and he makes a comment on how he knows both of them weren't there, just hurdling sheep throughout the mountain, which causes Jack to kind of just accept the fact that he knows what went on back there and leaves. Then several years pass by. We now see that Ennis and his wife are now raising a family with 2 daughters, and he's kind of dealing with this whole thing of what happened to him and Jack in his own way, and it's more with anger compared to Jack, but we'll soon talk about Jack's side later. But with Ennis, he lets the anger build up inside of him, and kind of lets it out on random people, because him and his family are at this random event where it's fireworks, looks like 4th of July, and there's these two men who are being loud behind them, and he kind of tells them if they could calm down a bit since there's kids around. And of course they're just being rude, and Ennis just punches them in the face without any warning, and it kind of shocks everyone around him, especially his wife. While Ennis deals with it in his own way, Jack deals with it by trying to find someone to kind of fill that void of Ennis, but he can't, since especially when it's during a time where gays weren't openly out, and straight men would look badly upon men who are gay, and they could kill them for it. But he does find a woman who is a well-known rodeo cowgirl, and they soon have a baby together. But there is an obvious tension between her father and Jack, since it's obvious that her father does not like Jack at all, since he doesn't really think of him as a man. Now, while all of this is happening, Jack does send Ennis a postcard trying to catch him up on the years and asking if he can visit. And for someone who says that night did not mean anything to him, he does respond to the postcard quickly and starts to wait for Jack by the window. And once Jack does arrive, he gets very excited, running outside, and pulls Jack to a corner where no one can see them, and they have this rough, passionate makeout moment, which almost caused Jake Gyllenhaal's nose to be broken by Heath Ledger. But back to the movie. Ennis's wife does catch them in the act, and she has this understandable shock and process trying to understand this whole thing, because she found out who the real Ennis is, that the man she married is not the man she thought she knew at all. And especially since they spend that night at a motel together, and then he comes back the next morning announcing to her that they're gonna take a trip to Brokeback Mountain. And she kind of has this realization that he might not love her at all, and everything is just a lie. Their whole life was just a facade that Ernest put up for himself. Now, while at Brokeback Mountain, Jack does question Ennis where the relationship is going, but he kind of gives the same response as before, that this isn't really anything, and that he has a family back home, he needs to take care of them. And that's what they do. They just go back to their lives like normally. Many years later, Ennis's daughters have grown up a bit, and there's an obvious change between Ennis and his wife, because now they're fighting with each other, and there's more hostile environment, and the daughters can take the notice of this. And giving a brief summary of how the relationship is slowly falling apart. While with Jack, him and his wife are not involved in the rodeo business anymore. Instead, they're working for her father's business, selling tractors and farming equipment to others. Now, here's where the story does seem a bit repetitive, because it shows Jack and Ennis going back and forth to Brokeback Mountain and back to their lives throughout many, many years. And the reason why I say this is because each time it shows how slowly Jack and Ennis are falling apart, because again, Jack just wants to keep this hidden from everybody, especially himself, while Jack wants to be open about him and Ennis and live a life together. But Ennis makes it obvious that he does not want that at all. But throughout the many years, we see that Ennis does get a divorce with his wife, and he starts to live alone and depressed. She remarries someone else, and he starts to date someone younger. Amongst hearing about the divorce, Jack visits Ennis and is very excited, thinking that the divorce was about them having this chance where they can finally be together and move in and do something with their relationship. But again, Ennis says that no, basically, and that he still has his daughters, asking Jack to please leave before they arrive. Jack does get back in his car and leaves, but he has this emotional breakdown where it causes him to drive all the way to Mexico and have sexual intercourse with a prostitute, just to fill that void of Ennis pushing him away again. On Thanksgiving, there's two different sides between Jack and Ennis's character development, because with Ennis, we see that he still denies himself and denies who he is and the real him. As he spends the Thanksgiving with his daughters and his ex-wife and her new husband, they go to the kitchen, have a conversation where it leads to her telling Ernest that she knows who Jack Twist is, and she knows about them and knows what's going on between them. But Ernest denies it and leaves in anger, and again takes his anger out on someone else, which shows the downfall of Ernest's character development. While with Jack, it's more seen as a positive way. We see that Jack and his wife bring out the dinner for Thanksgiving, and Jack is about to cut the turkey, but his father-in-law takes over in a rude way and starts to cut the turkey himself. Then Jack's wife makes a remark about how their son should eat first before watching TV. Jack gets up from his seat, turns off the TV, and sits back down. But his father-in-law goes to the TV and turns it on. Jack says that the boy should eat first. As the father-in-law walks towards the TV and turns it back on, he makes a remark how he's just the boy, that watching sports wouldn't hurt, and that he should be a man. Jack obviously gets angered by this comment and gets up from his seat again to turn off the TV. As he sits back down, his father-in-law starts to walk back to the TV, but Jack stands his ground and says,
"You sit down, you old son of a bitch! This is my house, this is my child, and you are my guest. You sit down before I knock your ignorant ass in the next week."
This moment is positive for Jack since it shows that since he's always let people push him around, be rude to him, make comments at him, and he just takes it all in, but this shows that he has had enough with everybody and that he's not going to take it anymore and he will step his ground. Lastly, these two trips of Brokeback Mountain are more heartbreaking since it shows now it's Jack and Ernest's relationship slowly falling apart since they're arguing more and finally realize that this is 20 years of fighting in this relationship between the two, since one wants to keep it hidden, but the other one wants to be open about it. Jack tells Ernest that he doesn't want this anymore. Seeing each other only a few times a year, going up to the mountain, sneaking around, he's tired of that.
You have no idea how bad it gets. And I'm not you. I can't make it on a couple of high altitude fucks once or twice a year. You are too much for me, ass. You son of a horse and a bitch. I wish I knew how to quit you.
Then why don't you just let me be, huh?
But then he has this emotional breakdown where he's crying and Jack holds him, and then they break off the relationship and end it for good. Soon, Ernest gets a postcard, but it's not from Jack this time. Instead, it's his own with a big red stamp that says deceased on it. He runs to the nearest payphone and contacts his wife, where she tells him that she's heard of Ernest, that Jack has talked about him all the time. She tells him that it was a freak accident while he was fixing his tire, but Ernest believes that he was beaten to death since men found out he was gay. She then informs him that he was cremated, sent to his parents, and his wishes were to be spread throughout Brokeback Mountain, but she doesn't know where that's at. He asks if they're living in the same place that Jack mentioned, and she confirms that they still do, so he drives up there. Once he visits his parents and he's having conversation with Jack's father, he comments on how Jack always talked about him and he knows who he is and who he is to Jack. Jack would always talk about this ideal life, then moving onto the ranch, helping his parents out, and says that obviously that never happened. Jack's mom tells Ernest that his room is upstairs and it was always left the way it was, and as soon as he walks in, there is a obvious opened closet. Then Ernest finds his shirt that he left up in Brokeback from the first time they met. Ernest hugs the shirt and then takes it with him, where Jack's mom notices and she gives him permission that he can keep it. Some time has passed and Ernest's oldest daughter goes to visit him to announce her engagement with a boyfriend she's had over a year. But when she leaves, Ennis walks towards his clothes closet and opens it up, where we see Jack's shirt inside of Ennis's shirt with a postcard of Brokeback Mountain next to it, showing that Ennis is still in the closet, hiding the real Ernest inside.
The many miles we walk, the many things we learn, the building of a shrine, only just to burn.